the Today Family Violence Center had said things like, put a little money in a bag, perhaps, maybe a change of clothes, some extra medication, spare car keys. And I was like, what? That's ridiculous. Just do it. They said, maybe. And the beauty in that was when somebody offered us the place and we already had the bag packed, my ex had flipped out. My 15-year-old came running into my room and he said to me, I'm so scared, like he's so messed up. What do you want to do? And we looked at each other and we were like, do you want to go? And we were like, oh my God, we have somewhere to go. Right? Oh, and I've
Yeah.
got the bag. And so I carried my 2-year-old out it was in the middle of October with no shoes on, just in a blanket, no jacket, no nothing. And went to that person's place and they hid my vehicle and we called the police and we started to deal with all of that.
Welcome to the Becoming Sound podcast, where we dive into the tough stuff and try to find the humor in the hot mess of being an adult child. Join me as we peel back the layers on growing up in dysfunction, navigating substance abuse, mental health challenges, and everything in between. Please be advised the following conversation discusses domestic violence, so trigger warning. Hello, everyone. Today, my guest is Miranda Solomon. She is a financial planner, empowering her clients to know their worth, strategically building their wealth, and maximizing every inch of their financial picture. Miranda is also a survivor of domestic family violence and childhood trauma. She has taken courses and educated herself to become trauma-informed so she can guide her clients accordingly. She is an inspiration to others who have been or may be going through similar situations. So welcome, Miranda.
Thank you. Thank you for that beautiful intro.
Oh, you're welcome. It's so nice to have you here.
Hmm.
So tell me a little bit about your experience growing up, the environment, and a little bit about your family dynamics.
Yeah. Big loaded question. So,
Did I say little bit? Sure, you can just
yeah, just
tell me a lot.
go. Yeah. I grew up in a family where there was a lot of love, a lot of connection, a lot of really great things. Was
Hmm.
told that I could do anything that I wanted and be anybody that I wanted. But there was always a little bit of an undertone, I think, of recognizing that my family was a little bit different.
Hmm.
It was probably when I was, in kindergarten, starting to get out and hang around other kids and see how their parents were and things like that, when I started to notice maybe things were a little different. I have a younger sister who has a different dad. My dad, her dad, is who raised me, but I didn't know that I was a stepchild till many years later. And I just remember, um, like a lot of fighting. There was a lot of anger, things like that, and not knowing that it was any different. And in my situation, there was addictions, there was a lot of drinking, there was a lot of that kind of stuff. Again, a lot of
Hmm.
really good that came out of it too. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is. It's good and bad. You can still feel love and get some decent messaging and live with, an amount of violence and addiction and stuff like that. It definitely impacts you.
Mhm.
So so tell me a little bit about how you came to recognize that.
It's funny the things that you remember, the specific situations. I remember going to a friend's house when I must have been 8 or 9 years old, to have a sleepover. And, the dad was around and, my dad worked really hard. He owned a construction company. And when the dad was around, I remember there wasn't like this air of like, why aren't you afraid of him? I remember thinking, like,
Mm,
why isn't he like yelling? Or, like
yeah.
how could he's like really fun loving and like nobody's afraid. Like, this is really weird. And I remember asking my friends, like, why? That's odd. That's different. And
Hmm.
they were like, oh, I don't know. That's just how my dad is. Right. And so as a child, you just recognize the different dynamics in different families. Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you remember having sleepovers with other family friends where it was the same? I
Yeah.
would say it was
Yeah.
probably 50-50.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's crazy how many families were going through this, but you don't see it behind closed doors.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
when you really learn. That's for sure.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So how did growing up in that environment affect you in later years, like in your teens and early 20s?
I would say for me, a lot of the domestic violence was emotional. like I said, there was a lot of yelling. There was a lot of just stress. I mean, it created some anxiety. I don't know how that's connected to, even ADHD and things like this, but you just learn how to cope a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm great in a crisis. I will tell you that. I'm able to stay very even keeled in a crisis and put off emotions because emotions weren't really safe. Even between my parents, you could share emotions and it was just a lot of fighting and a lot of scariness. And I think what life taught me in that household was that anger was immediately followed by violence. So
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of physical violence as well towards my mom, towards myself. And then also the dynamic that my younger sister didn't have a lot of that. And she I would think that she feels different as well. Like, why didn't I? And so, yeah, it's funny how it creates the guilts on both sides and trying to
Mm-hmm.
protect each other and just all of this. So I came out of
Yeah.
it feeling loved and like I could do anything, but also feeling like I wasn't worthy. And that every place I turned, I couldn't trust people to come through for me. And it's
Mm-hmm.
something, to be honest, that I understand most definitely that I still fight against today, right? I mean, life has taught me
Yeah.
this, but it's not a it's not a healthy belief that you can't trust
Mm-hmm.
people and that they won't come through for you.
Right.
What I did was get out into life and look for a partner and find somebody that was exactly like my dad. I felt like I'd known him my entire life when I met him,
Mm-hmm.
and to the point where I would tell stories or remember things of my childhood or just being younger. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's right. You weren't there. It was odd, really odd, but very comforting how just acting in that way within minutes was recognizable as, oh, this is home. This is safe, even though it's not really, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
How easy it is
Yeah.
to get sucked back into it after so many years, too, right?
Yeah. And I mean, that is unfortunately the norm. It's not an exception to the rule. A lot of kids who grow up in environments like that, whether it be addiction or abuse or whatever, excuse me, you tend to gravitate towards it because it's your comfort zone. It's what you know. It's that, like you said, that feeling of like, I've known this person my whole
Hmm.
life type thing. And I'm no different. I fell into the same situation. I was attracted to someone who had a drinking problem. And of course, it didn't present that way right out of the gate.
Of
It
course not.
never does. But I think it's the underlying tones of the personalities and just the behaviors that you're comfortable with, and not recognizing it when you're in your younger years is hard because you don't have any training, or there's no outside influences other than that. And so that becomes difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. There were some really neat things that I learned. I eventually found my way to Al-Anon.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the whole typical story, you get to Al-Anon and you're trying to get the drinker to quit drinking or the addict or
Yeah.
whatever it is. And you realize that it's more of a problem about what you're accepting and what you're looking for, perhaps. And it's about fixing yourself, not putting
Mm-hmm.
yourself in those types of situations, not accepting unacceptable behavior, all of these great things. But as I learned through that, I realized looking back at that family dynamic, and they say that it takes 5 generations to essentially, uh, I call it bleeding it out of the system of the family or fixing it, really. And we all want the best for our children and better than we had, for example. And I have to acknowledge that my dad's situation was a lot worse than mine was. And so he did the best with what he had, most definitely. And when I thought, oh, I'm dragging my kids through what I've already been through and I feel like such a failure. But if I deserve forgiveness, then he deserves forgiveness as well, because we're trying to do the best. But also in our family, on my mom's side, they had 6 children. And in the 50s, my grandpa had a drinking problem. And my grandma was like, no, we already have 2 children and we're not doing this. And so he completely went dry, did not find a program,
Mm,
never drank again a day in his life. What we would call as a dry drunk. He continued on with
yeah.
the behaviors. And so they wondered why the 3 girls all went on to marry addicts and alcoholics and all of this kind of stuff. And so just because he covered it up before the other kids were born and stopped the actual drinking, what about the symptoms of the drinking and all of that kind of thing, right? So, I mean,
Hmm.
all of the grandchildren did exactly the same thing, the female grandchildren for the most part. And some were very lucky and had a healthier family life and didn't go down that route, but most of us did, right? And so it's, yeah, you think about pulling the curtain and just like, okay, well, we stopped this actual behavior, but it continues in other ways and affects the family deep down, right? So that was a
Yeah.
wild realization that I spoke on at an Al-Anon conference one time. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate with that as well. My dad was, in the whole time I knew him, I think my dad was sober for 2 years, and he went to AA with a friend and got him, sober. And I remember saying in those 2 years, and you know, I would have never said this to him, but I remember saying it to my mom. It's like, gee, I liked him better when he was drunk, because he was
Oh, really?
extremely angry. And I realize now, of course, back then you can't comprehend it, but I realize now is that was the medicine for the pain. And when you don't have the medicine, then guess what? You don't have any way to deal with the pain and the anger that comes out and the level of just, yeah, no communication. No, never did get help for what the problems were for him. And same thing, it was not a great upbringing. And so he was doing the best he could, but I think in the 80s and 90s they didn't talk about their
Hmm.
feelings. And so, yeah, dry drunk it's hard. It's a hard thing to talk about, but it is a very real aspect of someone getting clean and sober and not addressing those issues, right? So you
Hmm.
can still perpetuate the conditions and the circumstances that are going on, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I love how you speak of
hugely.
the fallout of that. Like I said, when we hit Al-Anon, and just in my experience as a Al-Anon member, um, thinking that, it's all the drunks' fault and when they quit, everything's going to be okay. But there's a lot of
Yeah.
dynamics that bring these two types of people together. And it was actually a wonderful bridge actually when I got into Al-Anon. I would have conversations with him afterwards and he would be like, "Oh, you just go and talk about me." And I was like, "No, actually it's about me." Because, and so this is not all of your fault. And I think what we learned through doing the 12 steps as well is that, addicts are shaming themselves, and when we shame them more, it just makes it worse and they're just so used to it. So I remember it being a really great connection for my ex-husband and I for me to say, no, I take some responsibility in this. And as,
Hmm.
somebody that was enabler or a, codependent, um, I had learned that it was my job to shame him and blame everything on him, which isn't fair either, right? So
Yeah.
it was a very human moment to be able to sit back and say, like, we've created this ourselves, and how do we get through it? But I know that I won't speak too much on his family, but I do know that similar to what you said, um, it's kind of like when you drink, it's one of those things where I've heard that you stop maturing, or you just you can't deal with those issues, and that is it, like the medication, right?
Yeah.
It is a coping mechanism in itself, and I can say that I saw that from his family and in mine as well, right? We don't teach each other the coping mechanisms that we don't have, right? And so
Exactly.
yeah, just we're all
You
trying
don't
to
know
sort of
what you
numb.
don't know,
Yes,
you know?
one of my favorite
Yeah.
things for sure. I
Yeah.
will
And
tell
then
you
when
that.
you do know, you
Mhm.
do better, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
will say that addicts and alcoholics um have become some of my favorite people actually in life. I so admire that they're all about they see a person, right? They
Hmm.
actually see you in a very vulnerable way.
Hmm.
And I would say that when the addicts in my life were sober, they were some of the most wonderful people I have ever known. They wear their hearts on their sleeves. They try to do anything to make sure that nobody else has to feel maybe a lack of belonging and not welcome, or sadness to be alone, these types of things. And they're things that I actually carry on in my life, where I never ever want anybody to feel like they don't belong. And so
Hmm.
even my daughter-in-law coming into my family, she tried so hard to be loved. And at one point I was just like, sweetheart, whether you're in sweats or you do your hair or not, or you pay me compliments or anything, just the fact that you love my son and you make him happy and you're a good person, you're just breathing and existing here. We love you and accept you. And she just burst into
Yeah.
tears. But really, that's one of those things that we kind of owe to each other, to welcome someone in and be, provide a comfortable place to just be yourself, which is perhaps not something I was afforded when I was younger, or that we do
Hmm.
enough in society. So that's one of the good things that comes out of, having felt that way.
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully
Thank you.
said. Sometimes it's so hard to see that perspective when you're in the thick of it, and getting to a point where where you're able to see that is such a beautiful thing. And I couldn't agree more.
Mhm.
Some of the substance abusers in my life who are sober or clean or whatever, I mean, I have friends, everything, or whether they're still in it. I have friends who are still in the thick of it, and they are some of the most amazing people I know.
The
And that
unique
is
understanding, right? Maybe of
true
not of the
across the board.
trauma, but of the struggle, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a
so
beautiful
true.
side to it for sure.
Yeah. So let me in a little bit on and let our audience know about what you went through in your marriage, that in the domestic violence side. I mean, I know it's a topic that's difficult to talk about, but I think there's a lot of people out there still struggling, and having a voice, hearing someone speak on their experience and how they got out of that experience can be super helpful.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people listening too, like when I talked about it a little bit with my clients, there was a girl that was like 19 and she's like, "Oh, I have a friend that was going through that." And I went, "Oh, it's so sad that you recognize this even at
Hmm.
19 years old, and that wasn't a healthy relationship, and what can we do from the outside and things like this." So I'll speak on that a little bit, but my personal experience, I was a financial planner pretty much the whole time that we were together. I actually, when I found the job, it was when I was newly with him, and he was one of my biggest supporters. Go and get that job. You can do it. And just so great. And I had been working for, quite a few years as that planner. And I remember something had happened. We had gone camping with a friend. There had been an episode while we were there, and it was the second marriage for that mom. And she came to see me at work afterwards with her daughter and said, "Hey, listen, we need to talk about this." And it was really great as a learning experience for the daughter for sure. But she said, "I've been through this before, and there's some things that, really scared me. And we can't be around this type of behavior." And it was just a lot of, I think from what I remember, it was a lot of drinking, but it was like jealousy that was completely unwarranted and just some scary stuff for them. It's not something that they had experienced before. She had in her previous marriage. And the people I think that you need in that type of a situation, they come to you when you're ready, right? And there was another girl that I worked with that also had been through domestic violence as well. And she was like, "You can do this," and really got me through it. I guess I remember after having that meeting with the daughter's mom, and I'm actually still friends with her. The kids have moved on and they're almost married to other people and all of this, but she's a great, great lady. And I really appreciate that she stepped out and got, into that situation instead of just turning a blind eye and saying, "We don't want to be around those people," right? She definitely empowered me. And I remember her leaving the office and actually Googling, "Is this abuse?"
Hmm.
Right. And so for me, there was financial abuse. There was a lot of, how you word it, but like taking away of like dignities and things like this. There were times where he would lock me out of the room and I couldn't get at my medication and I couldn't change my clothes, and just, being treated less than like a dog. Really was wonderful to me in public, but the moment that the
Hmm.
doors were closed, really scary. And not
Yeah.
all the time. It's one of those relationships from my experience that went really, 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 really great with a lot of love bombing and then into the depths. Um, there was more than once that I was suicidal, and what carried me through obviously is that I have children and all of this. But to think that I could be in a situation where I am now as opposed to where I was, I never would have even been able to imagine. So I love to
Hmm.
empower people and tell them that, you're only a couple of decisions away from a completely different life. I've been divorced
Yeah.
for about 8 years now, and a lot of things are really great and different, but those were my beginnings. I found the Today Family Violence Center, and I reached out to them And they were amazing in just recognizing the situation that you're in and what is unsafe about it and not scaring you even more. I was in a small community, so that was another part of it, taking us out of the city and a little bit of isolation, and things like that. I do remember one of the times that I asked my husband when he flipped out on me, I was like, I wonder what would happen if I told people exactly how you treat me? Um, and he clenched his teeth and said, I would bash your face in. And I went, oh my goodness. Well, that led to a 911 call and the first of a couple emergency protection orders. And he had to leave for a while. And then after 10 days or so, I mean, it was still his house, and he was
Hmm.
allowed to come back and everything continued, right? Again, a lot of
Yeah.
promises that it's going to change and all of these types of things. So, in my experience with my addict, it was, yeah, I'm going to go to AA. And, I went to AA and you come home with groceries. And I talked to a girl named Kathy and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that doesn't seem right. So I call and say, is there somebody? No, there's nobody named Kathy here. So just more of the covering and all this kind of stuff. And nobody's ready to quit till they're ready to quit, right? But Al-Anon brought me to a position where I was able to let go and say, okay, well, this is, I'm going to, the kids and I are not going to not do things because you don't want to leave the house. So we're going to still, life continues if you don't want to, be a part of it and things like that. I stopped
Right.
making excuses and for his behavior, for not showing up to family events, to all this kind of stuff. And that was like the beginning of the erosion for sure.
Hmm.
Um, but in that situation, when somebody had said to me, you know what, we've heard some of the things. There was a family friend. My family was all scared of him. So there's nobody coming to save me. My mom's side of the family is here, and my dad and my sister are still back on the coast. And they didn't really have an idea of how bad it was. And again, they loved him because in public places, he was an amazing person and a really funny guy. And I remember girls saying, like, you're so lucky. I would love to find a guy like that, that just, he would walk by and kiss me on the forehead. And like I said, there were a lot of really, really good times. It wasn't
Hmm.
always abusive the minute that the car door closed for sure. And you could live on those great, times when it was better or when it was whatever, when the kids were young and all of this kind of stuff. But anyway, somebody had said to me, well, if you ever need a place to go, they kind of went out on a limb and said, you can come and stay with us. And I was like, no, it's never to get like that, right? Like, I don't think it's ever going to
Yeah.
be like that. Ended up being my birthday, and he and I were not getting along, and I was hanging out with those people, and my kids were with me. They were in their 60s. They were like parents to me. And yeah, they offered a place for me to stay if it ever got really scary. And we went home. And yeah, he had been using and drinking all day, and it was pretty bad. My 40th birthday. Happy birthday to me. Anyway,
Mm.
so he came home and dealt with a crazy crisis situation. And the Today Family Violence Center had said things like, put a little money in a bag, perhaps, maybe a change of clothes, some extra medication, spare car keys. And I was like, what? That's ridiculous. Just do it. They said, maybe. And the beauty in that was when somebody offered us the place and we already had the bag packed, my ex had flipped out. My 15-year-old came running into my room and he said to me, I'm so scared, like he's so messed up. What do you want to do? And we looked at each other and we were like, do you want to go? And we were like, oh my God, we have somewhere to go. Right?
Mm.
Oh, and I've
Yeah.
got the bag. And so I carried my 2-year-old out with it was in the middle of October with no shoes on, just in a blanket, no jacket, no nothing. And went to that person's place and they hid my vehicle and we called the police and we started to deal with all of that. Um, he had moved my vehicle. He had, taken my purse and taken the regular car keys. And you just never think it's going to get like that. But he
Uh-huh.
had no control and was trying to do things to get control, right? So that was my experience. It's not fun to talk about, but when I tell that story or I talk about it, my 15-year-old who is now 22 and almost married himself and in his own house, he can't, like, it just brings him back to a really yucky place. When we got to do the emergency protection order downtown, like I said, I was an outlying community, so we had to go all the way downtown to the courthouse. And there's these posters all over the family law area that says you might be a victim of domestic violence if, and I think there was like 10 things on that list. And I turned to my 15-year-old and I said, what do you think about this list? Do you identify with any of this? And he turned to me and he was like, he doesn't rape you, does he? I'm just like, no, no, he doesn't. But the other 9 things, he could
Wow.
recognize at 15 years old that those things,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Yeah, I mean, it's profound that kids are just wise beyond their years and they see everything, you know? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's brought him out to be like my 15-year-old was with us, but my his older brother had moved out long before that to go. He was from another relationship and he just couldn't stand the abuse and he had a place to go that was safer and happier and he's done really, really
Mm-hmm.
well. But that affected how my 15-year-old at that time dealt with relationships and how he trusted people and all of this kind of stuff. But I think he's taken it in a good way where he earns trust and he waited for a good relationship. And I'm definitely really proud of all of them. But
Yeah.
we've created a safe space. And now my youngest one is 13. And, I'll even say to him, I'm like, what is my biggest goal or duty to you? Like, what is my number one job? He goes, to keep me safe. So it's always been that in this new place
Yeah.
that this is a safe
Yeah.
space. And when we get those yucky feelings that feel like that, it's no longer the normal feeling, right? I notice I
Yeah.
go, oh, that's like a yucky feeling. I feel uncomfortable. Why is that? And I'm able to protect myself in a different way. And so they've learned that too, which is really good.
Yeah. Learn
Hmm.
to recognize your actual feelings instead of pushing them down, right?
And the
Yeah.
24/7, like guts always,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Can you speak a little bit to what kind of emotions do you think and what kind of thought process goes through your mind in staying? I mean, I know there's a lot of women and men out there right now who are processing these thoughts in their own minds like you did, not thinking all the time, oh, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. And when you think back on it, can you identify some of the thought processes of keeping you in that situation and what might help someone else?
Yeah. Well, I came from a broken home, right? My mom had already had me when she met my stepdad, and she was fleeing another bad relationship with my real dad, and that's why they left provinces and things like that. And I mean, she passed away when I was 10 years old. My sister was 6, just out of nowhere to an aneurysm, and then I was just left alone with my dad. And I mean, he's still my dad. I love him to death. I see him on a fairly regular basis, and we found a healthy way to respect each other and coexist. And yeah, I love him to bits. But I will say that I had a strong drive to keep the family together, right?
Mm,
Because I felt like I had failed in the first relationship, and now I'm married, and we have 2 kids with another one on the way, or whatever. We had the 3 children, and there was just I felt maybe it's not a burden, but like this strong urge and want to provide a family that had 2 parents for these kids, right?
yeah.
And those feelings being of, I guess, a little bit of fear, but you're kind of used to it. Like my stomach was always churning, and we were all used to it. My middle one had said to me one time, he was like, we get a phone call from dad. He's in a bad mood. We're driving home. And he says, I wonder if we clean the house and make his favorite meal,
Mm,
would he not yell at us? And I went, because I've been in Al Anon for a while. It was a beautiful moment and just a great memory for me to be able to say, sweetheart, if he wants to yell, he's going to find a way to yell. Right.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I've been like that when I'm in a bad mood, perhaps, looking for a reason to, get upset. It's not the real reason. It's because I'm, in a bad mood from work or whatever the situation is. It was one of those that it's not our fault. We don't always
Mm-hmm.
have to blame ourselves, even though it constantly feels like our fault. Um, I just felt like I went from crisis to crisis. And one of my friends had said, you have these episodes of, like I said, the big blows when you're not getting along, and why don't you write them on a calendar to see how frequent they
Mm,
are? And I was like, I am going to feel horrible about that if I actually put it
yeah.
on a calendar. And you know what? A couple of years later, I actually did do that. And it was one of those things that that opened my eyes a little bit. as to, wow, this is a lot more frequent than I realized, you know, and I got to
Yeah.
a point where I was just like, our whole relationship, there's never any change. And it, you know, he could treat other people with a lot of respect and not treat me with any. And I knew I deserved more. And if I stopped forgiving, then it was done, is what I realized. Right.
Yeah.
So I did a
Yeah.
lot of the mourning during the end of the relationship. So when it actually did happen, when it finally came down to it, yeah, somebody had told me that he'd been into some really rough drugs and a lot of financial issues with that. There's a lot of
Yes.
lying and things like that. You know, he would call me on a lunch break and I'm busy on the phone right now. I'm making a police report. Somebody got a hold of my credit card. They pulled out $1,700 at blah, blah, blah
Hmm.
ATM. And I was like, ironically, it was the same day that I gave you that credit card to go and grab gas. Well, that was me. What do you mean that was you? I don't have any money and da 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 da. So it was just a nonstop fight about some of these things that were, you know,
Yeah.
untrue. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the conditions you live in, right? There's always something, it's always
Mhm.
something going on. It's always a fire to put out, always that type
Crisis
of
to
thing for
crisis.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And getting out of it too, realizing like in
Hmm.
a healthy relationship that there's no crisis, like you're wait a minute,
Yeah.
you know, even to this
Yeah.
day, when somebody starts to raise their voice, I don't hear them at all. I need to tell people like that's not a way to get me to listen to you at all. I just
Yeah.
completely tune you like out.
Like tune out, right?
Yeah, I don't hear anything. Wah, 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 wah.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, how do I stay safe? My mind
Yeah.
instantly goes to that.
Yeah.
So
Like
maybe
a
some understanding
protective.
for people that have been through trauma before, no matter how hard we work, we try really hard to not be like that anymore.
Yeah.
But it's almost like having been in a war. You know what I mean? Once those same things all line up, you're like, whoa. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's
Um,
very true.
yeah,
PTSD is difficult to deal with as it is. And sometimes you can pinpoint the traumatic events, the big ones that have happened. But complex PTSD is all those little traumas that happen daily and they're hard to recognize. It's hard to recognize when you're in that situation. So tell me, Miranda, what were some of the resources that you used when finding or seeking help for yourself and how they work in the community? Can you explain a little bit?
yeah. So I just started to Google like, is this abuse? And a lot of resources came up. Once I got connected through the emergency protection order and the police and things like that, there was a Johns Howard Society, but the Today Family Violence Center was the one that really helped me out the most. And so they provided some advice. They'll even watch people's pets. That would have been one of the reasons that I wouldn't
Oh,
have left
wow.
sooner. They'll actually find there's an SPCA program to watch people's pets if they're in an unsafe situation. Um, there's a plethora of reasons when you're in an unsafe situation where, oh, you know, it's too hard to get away and things like this. So the support is super important. So they have
Hmm.
a helpline. I know there was a distress line that I called at one point. So maybe we'll look up some of these things and provide some links and that
Yeah,
after the
definitely.
podcast for sure.
Yeah.
Um, there are just a lot of resources out there that we don't realize are out there. There's a lot of people that want to help. But again, you know, ending that stigma about, you know, being in the bad situation, and you'd be surprised about how many people have had a similar experience, and how many would love to help, right?
Hmm.
If you just talk about it a little bit. Once I started opening up a
Right.
little bit more, then friends started to, you know, reach out and things like this. And they told me when they were afraid, when I sometimes wasn't even afraid. And that made me see that maybe I'm in a situation that they don't understand and all of
Hmm.
this kind of stuff, right? And so I do know
Yeah.
that they provide resources for those who have a family member or somebody who is affected by domestic violence or addictions and is in an unsafe situation in a relationship, whether they live together or not, all of this kind of stuff. So all those
Hmm.
behaviors and things like that. What to watch out for, they're all out there, you know, and
Yeah.
through the Today Family Violence Center. Yep.
Yeah, the Today Family Violence Center. Now, do they suggest safe places to go, like accommodation type thing? Or how can someone access finding a space? Because, like you mentioned before, too, not everybody has that safe space to go to. And so, how do they look for those resources?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I was one of those people for 17 years. I didn't feel like I could get away. I would have no money. I was completely controlled even in my role. I could see that in other people's situations. But I was definitely in that position. They will connect with different resources. So they're through the Johns Howard Society as well. And I'm not sure, maybe it's Economic Development Canada. It's one of our social programs, so there is a type of a grant if to get you set up in a new place. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a little bit of money to just help you get out of that situation. There are shelters. Today, Family Violence Center has connections to all of those resources, and we'll bring them
Okay.
in for free when there's that situation. There's also counseling that they can provide. They actually
Mm-hmm.
connected me as well to once I was out of the situation, a course that was put on by some psychologists that were, doing a practicum about what is healthy in relationships and what is not healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
what does healthy love look like? Does it come with strings attached? And you must do this if I do this, or I did that, and you need to do this. And just realizing, having been a part of that my entire life in these types of relationships that always had that connotation of owing and all this type of thing and
Mm-hmm.
control as well. It just helped us, as there was a bunch of people had come out of domestic violence, men and women, young people, seniors. You would have been surprised how many people were in that group. And it was about 8 weeks long of just learning some of those things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
rebuilding confidence and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, they would be the
Yeah.
premier resource that I would recommend.
Okay.
But again, the Google machine has lots and lots of information. So
Yeah.
that's always usually the place we start, right? I
It
do remember
does.
that there was
Yeah.
like a safe exit as well. So if you're like browsing and you're afraid that perhaps somebody's going to find something out where it doesn't say cookies or any of that kind of thing, that's all enabled when you go to look up that stuff and you're on the website for the Today Center. You
Oh.
close it and there's no having to private browse and all of that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's really helpful for sure. I'm sure for people who are, having to hide that.
It's a safe
Um,
place to go look. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So tell me a little bit about some of the trauma-informed courses and how does that translate into what you do now? Like, how do you work with your clients in a different way?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was basically definitely raised in, like I said, a small community. I was, as my mom passed away when I was fairly young, my sister and my dad worked a lot, owned his own company. And I saw the relationship that he was able to build with those clients. You'd run into them at the mailbox, I like to say, and they were like, "Hey, did my windows come in?" and things like this. And so um that relationship and that trust was something that was really important to me. And I've always been somebody who wants to be a helper.
Hmm.
And so giving back not only to community, but to others, who better to help the previous me than the healed me, right? And
Yeah.
so I had to learn somehow, and not just in the domestic violence side, when there's practitioners, when you're medical doctors, everybody's got to learn. Can we bring in a
Yeah.
student? I mean, I'm the person that is absolutely, we all have to learn in real world
Yeah.
situations, right? Somebody gave
Sorry.
me a
That's right.
chance, and so I try to help others to get out of this
Hmm.
situation, but also to help others in the community to just give back, right? I mean, you just don't want to um, get successful and not bring others with you and help your community all along. Because as
That's
I
right.
help people with their financial planning, they're able to save a lot of tax and maybe travel a lot more, which changes the situation for their family, but also changes for their community. And it's really affecting that change and that growth and sustainability for the entire community. So
Hmm.
I speak for the Today Family Violence Center quite a bit. I've done some podcasts with V4U Radio. I was their guest speaker at the first garden party fundraiser and was the MC last year, which was really, really great. And
Nice.
they've just created a wonderful atmosphere with that get together for sure. It's one of their premier fundraisers. I've gotten involved with Kaleo Collective, which is actually a single parents resource that helps to do Secret Santas and things like that for those that just have one parent. We bring the little kiddos in and they go behind the curtains, and there's a bunch of us elves that help them pick out, presents and things like that. There's a Mother's Day one
Nice.
as well. My youngest one was like, "Oh, they never helped us when you were a single mom." And I was like, "But this is really good because we get to
Yeah.
see these people have a little bit of a hand up and have
Yeah.
a great feeling, and just to be part of that experience is, oh my goodness. Anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah, I do a lot in the community. I'm getting out to speak and things like that, and it's not only on my trauma history, but again, being a survivor victim, of domestic violence, that's one side of it. And so understanding and having that compassion for somebody who's been through something very tough. Obviously, I give my services for free to anybody who's coming out of that stuff, to just help them budget and figure out where they need to be,
Hmm.
and provide them some understanding without judgment. I think in my industry, it can be, like we're all stuffy and, not
Hmm.
approachable. And I like to say inclusive, but that tends to lead a connotation these days more so of a race, but really inclusion of everybody, right? It should be accessible information. Therefore, I go
Yeah.
out and speak every chance that I get to other business owners, to anybody who is looking for information, because it should be free. It shouldn't be just for the $1 million people that get the
Right.
information. And we'll never get to be millionaires if we don't get a chance to have somebody mentor us and help us. So I work with a lot of business owners and networking and things like that, to just share of my information. And I'm not perfect, and I made lots of mistakes. There's
Hmm.
actually one of the events that I run, that I'm the lead sponsor of, that is called Messed Up Mondays. And it's a bunch of business owners that get together, whether you're thinking about being self-employed, whether you have been for 4 months, 10 years, 25 years, come and share your experiences with us. It's a free event.
Okay.
Yeah, so in support of being a victim or a survivor of domestic violence, I wanted to come at it from another side, to understand like the psychological side of it, right? And by no means have I, gotten a psychological degree or any of this type of thing, but just really understanding from the clinical side about some of the things that are going on in the background, in when we feel uncomfortable and we're unable to make decisions or trust ourselves again, and this type of thing. So what's going on psychologically in the background, to get just a better idea of supporting clients. And I
Hmm.
noticed it was something that I already did, in making people feel comfortable and helping them to get past some of those things. And you know what? Hey, those people that have not had any experience with domestic violence have had bad experiences with, another financial planner, or they've had, a bad relationship end where there was, I lost a whole bunch of money, or I didn't know how to protect myself, or whatever. We are really emotional about our money and about our future. And it can get scary whether we are coming from this situation or not. Right. So
Hmm.
just another avenue to understand that. And so it really is a trauma informed difference from both sides, in that understanding and that inclusion and non-judgmental place, to be able to get through what you need to. Okay, this is what it was before. This is how it is now. And here's how we can work towards, building this future. And that's really what I do. Is I like to say that I peddle peace of mind. I love how cute that is, the
That
dog
is
and pony
cute.
show. It really is an experience. Your financial plan can be really scary, but and we often don't know what it includes. And so having somebody that is not focused and biased on sales and all of that kind of stuff, taking the time to look at the bigger picture, to
Yeah.
recognize some of the problems that might arise should somebody pass away early, should something happen, and being able to close up those loopholes ahead of time, being proactive, um, is where it makes a really big difference. As I said, if you don't have that $500,000 to invest, you still need to understand where you're at and how you can affect change going forward, to maybe save for your kids' education or retirement or whatever. You still
Hmm.
need that advice, but you also need to understand where you're at risk should something happen. And so being an advisor that is holistic in that way, to look at all the situations. And I have lots of great people around me that help me, that are, accountants and lawyers that do
That's right.
estate planning and this type of stuff, that we don't pay each other to do any of that. It's just doing what's right for the client, which is kind of rare when we're only just looking for the $500,000 to invest to get paid. Then all of these people get left out of having information. So I'm
Yeah.
really about, every time you meet with me, you're going to feel a little bit better, or any planner that you work with, you should feel like you're eating the elephant one bite at a time. And we should be touching base throughout that meeting. How are you feeling about things? Do you have any questions? Recognizing that body language. and just really helping someone to feel that they've got a comfortable place and somebody that they can approach with any type of question.
Yeah. And I think that's so important what you said. I mean, being trauma informed, you're also better equipped to handle people coming out of abusive situations. And there's a lot of guilt and shame built into that, and getting them through, and then trying to look at numbers at the same time when they feel they don't have anything, you know? And so that can be a great resource to help people navigate that and help them feel more comfortable, and that they can have power over their own financial goals and dreams and all that stuff. So I think
Yeah, they have
that's
somebody
really,
they can trust. Yeah.
yeah, really beautiful for sure. And I'm sure that is so helpful to people who need it. So is there anything else that you want to say in closing, or is there anything you want to plug that you're doing right now or coming up for you?
Oh, there's so many things going on. Just looking for opportunities to get out to speak to more people. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they should understand that a financial plan is not just an investment plan, and that there's a lot more to it that needs to be looked at. For me, the fulfillment comes from seeing people, their shoulders relax and go, "Oh my goodness, couldn't even know if I could ever retire. Oh my God, could we actually have a situation where we know we're going to be okay no matter what?" And so
Yeah,
having, the support behind me and the referral partners with me and the software to make that easy, meeting with clients day to day is what I love, and
yeah.
helping people feel better. So it's really great. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah.
This was a wonderful conversation and very enlightening, and I'm sure that the audience will get something out of it. And I'm so happy that you were able to join me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for letting me share my story. And,
Oh,
it
you're
just gives
welcome.
people a place to know that they can reach out for help. And there's a lot of people out there who are looking to find, a place to help and somebody
Yeah,
to give advice to. So,
for
yeah.
sure. And I will link everything in the show notes that we talked about so that people can have resources to reach out. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Take
Bye
care.
bye. Thank you for joining me today on another episode of Becoming Sound. If this episode resonated with you in some way, please share it with someone you care about. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It helps to get this information out to more people who may need it. If you have a sec, I would love a follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. While you're there, hit the 5-star rating and give me a review. When you're scrolling, follow me on my social platforms, and I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Have a fabulous day, lots of love and gratitude from me. Please note, the views, information, and opinions expressed during the Becoming Sound podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved. The content of this podcast is to educate, inform, and for entertainment purposes only. This podcast series and the content presented does not constitute for medical or other professional advice or services. If you are in crisis or in need of help, please contact your medical or professional provider.